The first thing Maya noticed about inmate #C734 were his hands. They were not the hands of the monster she'd imagined for 17 years. They were steady, sculptor's hands, with clean nails and a network of fine scars across the knuckles. As he carefully arranged the donated books on the prison library cart, his movements were gentle, almost reverent. Maya, a woman who drafted policies that could alter the course of nations, felt her breath catch. This was the man she had, against all reason, begun to love. And she was about to discover she had been loving her father's killer all along. The air in the state penitentiary was a stale cocktail of bleach, sweat, and despair. Maya Lawson, a senior attorney in the office of the president, usually inhabited a world of polished mahogany and hushed, powerful conversations. But once a month, she traded her power suits for a simple button-down and slacks, volunteering with Pages of Hope, a charity bringing books to inmates. It was her secret sanctuary, a way to touch a world of raw humanity far removed from the abstracted power of the presidency. She had been assigned to the library, and that's where she met Elias Vance. He was a quiet man, his presence a still pool in the chaotic ocean of the prison. Convicted of second-degree murder, he'd been on death row for 15 years before a statewide moratorium stayed his execution, leaving him in a torturous limbo. He was now just a lifer, a number in the system. But to Maya, he became so much more. Their connection began with books. He preferred historical nonfiction. She loved sprawling literary fiction. They started leaving notes for each other in the returned books, a comment on a phrase, a question about a character's motivation. The notes grew longer, more personal. He wrote of his regret, not in the broad, performative way of many inmates, but with a quiet, crushing specificity that felt achingly genuine. He wrote about the boy he had been, a man fueled by a toxic mix of fear and cheap whiskey, and the single, irrevocable action that shattered 2 lives, his and his victims. He never used the victim's name. The file, she later realized, had listed the name, but in her mind, Elias's crime was an abstract tragedy. Her own tragedy was a separate, locked vault in her soul. In the sterile visiting room, separated by scarred plexiglass, they didn't speak of his crime. They spoke of the ocean he had never seen, the symphony she described, the simple, heartbreaking beauty of a sunrise. She found herself drawn to his intellect, his surprising humility, and the profound peace he seemed to have forged in his personal hell. She, the architect of legal frameworks, was building a relationship on a foundation of words and stolen glances. It was strange, illogical, and to her, undeniably real. She was falling in love with a condemned man. Back in her world of power, Maya was appointed to the prerogative of Mercy Committee. It was a solemn duty. The committee was tasked with the gargantuan responsibility of scrutinizing hundreds of applications for presidential pardon, submitted for the country's upcoming National Day of Unity. They were to compile a short list of the most deserving cases. Inmates who had demonstrated profound rehabilitation, those with questionable trials, or those whose continued incarceration no longer served the public interest. For weeks, she buried herself in files. They were heavy, both in physical weight and in the lives they contained. She read tales of robbery, fraud, and violence, her legal mind dissecting facts while her human heart ached. The day she picked up file #C734, she was drinking her 3rd coffee, fighting a dull headache. The name, Elias Vance, made her smile softly. Her Elias. She began reading with a familiar, personal interest, ready to advocate fiercely for him. The summary of the crime was standard: a botched robbery at a corner grocery store. A struggle. A single gunshot. The victim, a store owner, had died at the scene. Then her eyes scanned down to the victim's name. Robert Michael Lawson. The world did not slow down. It stopped. The hum of the air conditioner vanished. The voices of her colleagues in the adjacent office became a distant, meaningless buzz. Her own father's name stared back at her from the cold, bureaucratic typeface of a state-issued document. Robert Michael Lawson, age 42, survived by a wife and a daughter. Maya, age 8. 17 years collapsed in on themselves. The smell of her father's grocery store, the mix of fresh bread and cleaning solution, flooded her senses. The sound of the phone ringing in the middle of the night, the sight of her mother crumbling to the kitchen floor, the chilling official word, homicide. The face of the monster she had constructed in her childhood nightmares, a featureless, hulking brute of pure evil. That brute had a name, Elias Vance. A wave of nausea so violent she gripped the edge of her desk. Her heart wasn't pounding, it was a frantic, trapped bird beating against her ribs. The room tilted. Elias. The man whose letters were tucked in her bedside drawer. The man whose gentle voice had been a balm to her own hidden loneliness. The man she had imagined a future for, a fantasy where a miracle pardon might set him free. Her mind became a fractured slideshow of dissonant images. Elias's scarred hands, now imagining them holding a gun. His thoughtful eyes, now seeing the cold calculation of a killer. His whispered confession of regret, now hearing it as a lie crafted to manipulate her. The professional, the attorney, the powerful woman, they all shattered, leaving only the 8-year-old girl whose world had ended in a burst of violence. She stumbled to the women's restroom, locking herself in a stall, dry heaving over the toilet. The sobs that came were silent, tearing things, ripped from a place so deep she had forgotten it existed. How could she have been so blind? How could fate be so cruelly, exquisitely perverse? For days, she moved through her life like a ghost. She couldn't eat. She couldn't sleep. The committee meeting to finalize the shortlist loomed. Elias's file was on the table. His application was strong, her own glowing, personal testimony, written before she knew, was part of it. She sat at the long, polished table, her colleagues' voices a distant murmur. The chairman held up Elias's file. Vance Elias. A compelling case. Strong rehabilitation record. No infractions in a decade. Multiple endorsements from staff and volunteers. He glanced at Maya. Your notes were particularly persuasive, Maya. Do we have a consensus to recommend him for pardon? All eyes turned to her. She was the expert on this case. She was the one who had fought for him. Maya looked down at her own hands, clenched in her lap. She saw the little girl clinging to her mother. She saw the empty chair at the dinner table for 17 years. She felt the phantom weight of her father lifting her onto his shoulders. Then she saw the man in the prison library, his eyes full of a hard-won peace, a man who had become more than his worst mistake. A man she loved. The silence in the room stretched, thick and expectant. Her mouth was desert dry. She had the power to grant life or confirm a living death. She was the daughter of the victim and the only advocate of the killer. The two halves of her soul were at war, and the outcome rested on a single word. She opened her mouth, her heart pounding a frantic, terrible rhythm against her ribs. The ghost of her father stood on one side, the living man she loved on the other. And in that agonizing silence, suspended between vengeance and grace, Maya Lawson had to decide which one to betray. The silence in the committee room was a physical weight, pressing the air from Maya's lungs. The faces of her colleagues, sharp, intelligent, expectant, swam in her vision. They were waiting for her, the lead reviewer, to speak the words that would seal Elias Vance's fate. In that suspended moment, her life did not flash before her eyes. His did. She did not see the hardened criminal from the file. She saw the man in the prison library, his head bowed in concentration as he repaired a broken book spine with meticulous care. She heard his voice, not confessing to a crime, but softly reciting a poem he had written about the sound of rain, a sound he hadn't heard in 17 years. She felt the staggering weight of his regret, not as a plea for freedom, but as a burden he had learned to carry with a grace that humbled her. The ghost of her father, a beloved and smiling memory, did not feel betrayed. Instead, a long-buried memory surfaced, vivid and warm. Her father, a man of profound, simple faith, teaching her to pray. "Forgive us our trespasses," he would say, his hand on her small head, "as we forgive those who trespass against us." It had never been a transaction to him. It was a state of being. Vengeance had never been part of his legacy. Love was. To condemn Elias now would not be an act of loyalty to her father. It would be a betrayal of everything her father had taught her about compassion. It would be allowing the long-ago act of a terrified, drunken boy to claim a second victim, the redeemed man she loved, and the woman she had become. She lifted her head, her gaze clearing. The internal tempest settled into a profound, unshakable calm. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," she began, her voice steady, belying the storm she had just weathered. "The case of Elias Vance is indeed the most complex I have ever encountered. It forces us to confront the very purpose of justice. Is it merely punitive, or is it, at its highest calling, restorative?" She picked up the file, not as a daughter seeking revenge, but as an attorney seeking truth. The man described in these rehabilitation reports, endorsed by chaplains, psychologists, and correctional officers, is not the same man who committed that terrible crime 17 years ago. He has spent every day since atoning, not just in word, but in the quiet, consistent transformation of his character. He has become a force for peace within the walls of that institution. She paused, looking each of her colleagues in the eye, her secret anguish forging a steel-like conviction in her argument. To keep him incarcerated is no longer an act of public safety. It is an act of pointless suffering. The man who exists today has more than paid his debt to society. He has rebuilt his soul. And if the prerogative of mercy means anything, it must be for cases exactly like this, where a human being has proven, beyond any doubt, that they are worthy of a second chance. She placed the file back on the table. "I strongly and unequivocally recommend Elias Vance for the presidential pardon." The vote was called. One by one, the ayes echoed around the table. It was done. Weeks later, on the National Day of Unity, the pardon was signed. Maya was not there when Elias walked out, a free man, squinting against the unaccustomed sun. He found the note she had left for him at the halfway house, delivered by a trusted intermediary. It read, "Elias, freedom is your new chapter. Write it with the same courage and grace you showed in the darkest of places. The story we built together in that prison was real, but it was a story that existed outside of time. My part in it was to help you find your freedom. Your part was to help me rediscover my heart. For that, I will always be grateful. Do not look for me. My forgiveness is not a chain to bind you, but a key to set you free. Go and live. Be the man I know you to be. That is the only ending I could ever need. Yours always, Maya." She never saw him again, but on the anniversary of her father's death, she no longer visited a cold grave alone with only grief for company. She went with a complex, peaceful heart, filled with the strange and sacred knowledge that love, in its most unexpected and forgiving form, had not betrayed her father's memory. It had, in the most profound way possible, honored it. She had chosen to break the chain of violence with an act of radical mercy, and in doing so, she had finally, fully, set them all free. Thank you for listening. For more strange love stories in unconventional places, do subscribe to the channel.